Welcome to Loup TV. I'm your host, Gene Munster. And I guess, like any great feature film, there is a sequel. We have a sequel to Rob Maurer's wonderful FSD teaching that he recently did on Loup TV. Check it out if you haven't seen it. Welcome back, Rob. Our topic today is, I guess, an extension of FSD and robotaxis. And for those who are new to the robotaxi topic, can you give us just kind of a 101 where this came from, and we'll take it from there?
Yeah, so I think the idea of robotaxis have been around as long as companies like Uber and Lyft. It's a pretty logical next step of, okay, if we can eliminate the driver, costs are going to come down, utilization is going to go up. There's going to be more and more circumstances where a robotaxi can really help drive the economy and obviously capture a lot of high margin revenue for a business. So I think there's been a lot of excitement about that historically, and definitely it has heated up in the last 5 years as we've seen companies make acquisitions in the space, GM with Cruise, many other examples, and companies starting to deliver more and more autonomous features. Tesla, as we've talked about at length, GM with things like Super Cruise, and then Waymo, they've really actually started a ride sharing service, autonomous ride sharing service in a very limited geofenced location down in Arizona and sort of the Phoenix area. So it's been a dream for a long time. And I think we're slowly seeing those steps towards that future.
In that dream, you hit it right out of the gates there too, is this concept of really taking friction and cost out of transportation. Like you said, driving costs down, driving utilization up in wait times, making those and more attainable, shorter wait times. So makes a ton of sense. And when we think about the auto industry more broadly, think about the number of cars sold globally a year, and we generally think of the hardware piece of it as kind of a $2 trillion per year. But the broader transportation piece, I don't even know what the numbers are. It's a big number, but this is a juicy opportunity, and not surprising that Uber and Lyft want to get there. That's very obvious. They want to get there. And I guess a year and a half, 2 years ago, it was a little bit surprising to me. Now it makes a ton of sense that Tesla wants to get there. Let's start with what has he said publicly about expectations of when there will be Tesla robotaxis?
Oh man, probably a lot of different things over the years. I think if we go back to Tesla's autonomy day, really that was when they first sort of put all the cards on the table of like, hey, this is what we're going after. This is what we think a robotaxi could be worth. And the market's reaction to that at the time was actually pretty negative, just
Yeah, people
because
didn't care.
yeah, just a lot of skepticism out there and like,
It was
okay,
such an aggressive target, it just went over people's heads.
yeah, and I
Understandable.
think there wasn't a lot of tangible autonomy related stuff there. Like they talked about their hardware, their full self-driving computer, and I think that went over a lot of people's heads. A lot of stuff about neural networks, a lot of stuff about processing, where you have a lot of automotive analysts sitting in the room that maybe either don't understand or don't necessarily care as much about that sort of stuff. So I think at that point the market was looking for tangible stuff from Tesla, not really willing to recognize as much of that future opportunity. And obviously, we've really seen that change over the last 12 to 18 months. But in terms of,
The timing of
right.
Robotaxi, and maybe my guess is if he's saying the level 5 functionality in FSD by the end of the year, Robotaxi within a year or two. So maybe that's kind of the base one. And then let's talk about the building blocks to get to Robotaxi. Imagine you are in charge of Robotaxi at Tesla. What are the things that you're working on?
Yeah, so I think on that, just to kind of wrap up that Elon point, people have been critical of him for many years because he said, we're going to have a fully autonomous coast to coast drive from LA to New York, I think at the end of 2018. He reiterated again for end of 2019. This year, we may actually finally see it with the full self driving beta that we've discussed. And then in terms of the building blocks, it's really all about collecting data. And I think in our previous episode, we talked about Tesla kind of having their cake and eating it too. Tesla has created this amazing model where they're delivering these vehicles that are collecting massive amounts of data to a customer fleet that's paying them.
Mhm.
Tesla's getting paid for people to go out and collect data for them, which is just, it's sort of an
Remarkable.
insane, yeah, it's sort of an insane concept versus a company like Waymo. They're having to buy their vehicles, they're having to pay Waymo test drivers to,
Oh, I
be
see.
in those vehicles, monitoring things like that. Tesla's actually flipped that entire equation and they're just getting revenue while they're collecting all this data. So it's really a cool situation and it allows Tesla to scale their data collection so much more rapidly than any other company could do because as Tesla scales production, every single vehicle that they get out there is just collecting more and more data for them in more and more locations. So, in terms of the building blocks, I really do think it's all about the data, and Tesla has the best business model for collecting that data.
And the data is probably similar data that they'd be collecting to refine FSD.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Tesla, we don't know all their cards. We don't know exactly how they're doing all these things, but they have talked about it. And Andre Karpathy, their director of AI at Tesla, he has a number of different talks out there where they talk about how Tesla does these things. And really what they're doing is they're finding situations where full self-driving doesn't work properly. And then what they can do is they can ping the fleet for other similar situations. They can collect all these different situations and then they can aggregate them together, run them through the neural networks and improve how the system would operate. And then, like that, they can just deploy that update out to the entire fleet of roughly a
Mhm.
million vehicles equipped for eventual full self driving. So it's really this nice feedback loop where they're collecting this data, they're being able to sort of pull in all these different examples and then learn from that and then teach the entire fleet instantaneously.
And probably the building blocks are in place around the hardware piece on this, correct? We're talking about the robotaxis being just off the manufacturing line Teslas, correct?
Yeah, so I mean, ever since 2017, I believe Tesla has had very similar hardware. They've made a couple of updates along the way. And certainly, a big one would have been the full self-driving computer, but Tesla designed that originally to be very easy plug and play if they needed to swap it out. So they thought about that in advance and have done that in many cases. So really, the hardware they've said in the past, they've gone back and they've talked about it. Is this really exactly what we want? And each time they've come away with the conclusion that yes, this is the right path, and they feel confident in that.
So we get to the neural network, the AI gets smarter, we're there, the hardware's there, the car is ready. What are the other pieces that they need to build to make that jump from selling a car that's autonomous to actually having a robo taxi fleet? Brand building, for example, or
Yeah.
how do you make that jump?
Yeah, I think that's a question that's come up on a few different earnings call. I think you actually asked Elon, is there going to be an interim period where we go from where we're at now
Yeah,
to an
we
actual
call it
full self-driving like
chaperoned
Tesla
autopilot.
network? Right, where there's actually, a Tesla like Uber network where you actually still have the human driver involved. And I think ARK Invest, they've talked a lot about that too. That's something that they're excited about. For me, I don't necessarily care as much about the bridge to that because it's going to be, if we zoom out, think in decade terms,
Yeah,
that's going to be such a short period of time where maybe that's happening for 6 months or a year where Tesla has this sort of app where you can call an actual person to come pick you up. And maybe that gives Tesla some good data along that way. But to me, as an investor, it's not something that I overly care about. I think it would be very exciting for investors and for the market to see Tesla
right.
take that step because it is an indication that they feel like they're getting closer and closer.
Makes
But to
sense.
me, what's more important is watching the progress in terms of what the autonomous suite can actually do. I don't really care if Tesla comes out today and says, someone can come pick me up in a Tesla. Sure, I'd use that. Like, it would be interesting. But for investors, really what the focus should be is those autonomous features and how that's coming along, because that's what justifies the valuation and keeps it going.
Agree with you on the big picture, just framing it a little bit about this robotaxi chaperone concept that we and others have talked about. And the basic idea again is that you have an app, there's an app out there, Tesla promotes an app, probably more through word of mouth than anything. And you as a driver, you still need to be behind the wheel, but it probably would be less stressful, less tiresome for the driver because of all these other autopilot features that we've talked about. And like you said, kind of learn along the way. So a chaperoned autopilot, and then that will be a short period of time. And then we're off to the races. A question that I have, these are nice cars. And when I think about Uber and Lyft and some of the abuse I think that happens in a rideshare network, is somebody as a Tesla owner going to want to submit their car to the fleet if we fast forward 5 years from now and have the car work for them while they're at work and then at the end of the day come back to a dirty car? Or do you see this more as mom and pop businesses buying 10 cars and kind of having the 10 cars work for them as a small enterprise?
Yeah, I think you kind of hit it on the head. I think there's going to be a mix. There's going to be these sort of fleet operators that just buy a bunch of Teslas. They have a parking lot or a parking garage. They're doing the cleaning and the maintenance, overnight when it's not as busy. I think that's going to be probably the big portion of the business model, but everything has a price. So for a Tesla owner, if they're making $10 a day or something like that, they're probably not going to want to lend their Tesla out for that small of a return. But if they're making $100 a day, 3 grand a month from something like this, and their payment on their vehicles $500 to $1,000, well, that kind of changes things. Where okay, sure, I'll take the hit on someone scuffing up my interior for $100 a day. So it's really just dependent on what the utilization looks like, what the cost equation looks like, and I think early on in the Tesla network, you're going to see a higher return from lending out your car. And as the market gets more saturated, Tesla keeps increasing their production. Obviously, that return is probably going to come down over time. And we'll probably see more of that commercial type of fleet ownership, I would think.
So the Tesla Robotaxi is going to get a lot of attention from the media and investors over the next couple of years. But my guess is that the actual number of vehicles in the network will be minuscule compared to Uber and Lyft. How do you view that the next couple of years in terms of actually availability of hailing a Tesla?
Sure. And that's why I think Tesla may be less interested in starting sort of a Tesla network service with a chaperone, because they just don't have the vehicle fleet out there. To date, Tesla has delivered about 1.4 million vehicles. Maybe a million of those have the full self driving hardware in them. So I'm not sure exactly what the fleet looks like for Uber and Lyft. You happen to know that?
Off the top of my head, I don't, but it is,
So
I know
certainly,
there's like 30 million monthly, 40 million before the pandemic, and Lyft in terms of monthly active users. And I think from Uber, it's probably like 120 million, something like that. So
okay.
I don't know how many drivers that is, but it's
Yeah.
a big number. And we talk about the crazy thing about Tesla, it's impressive what the growth is, but it's still off of really small numbers.
Right. 1.4 million vehicles total delivered. That's
Mhm.
a couple months for something like Volkswagen. So the fleet is still very small relative to the total automotive market. And yeah, like you said, Uber and Lyft, they have pools of pretty much every driver they can pull from, versus Tesla would have that very limited pool. And obviously not all those customers are going to want to be driving people around in their spare time. So
Well, I want to
I,
frame in, and any final words, then I'm going to put a bow on this, but do you have any final words on Robotaxi?
Final words, I think 2021 is going to be an extremely interesting year. Like we talked about in the full self driving episode, I think Tesla's been stuck at that local maximum. And this year, I think they're poised to kind of break through that with the FSD beta and the architectural rewrite. And I think that's going to get a lot of people excited about the potential for Robotaxi. And the one other thing I would add to that, Tesla's talked a lot about doing full self driving as a subscription. And I think that's going to shift how analysts are modeling the company. Tesla's going to go from having that all recognized up front to having this line of revenue that's recurring. And I think Wall Street really loves high margin recurring revenue. So I think as Tesla offers that, a lot of people are going to change the way they're thinking about Tesla. And that's sort of a bridge to future financials of Tesla network.
Love to have you back and talk margin, software, the auto industry, all of that for another day. But it is kind of fun to note. I have a ton of respect for everything that all the way you think about the world, Rob. We're on a slightly different page when it comes to Robotaxi. Loop is for one of our 2021 predictions, predicting that there will be a chaperoned Robotaxi fleet by the end of the year. The nice part is in 12 months, we'll know. Either way, I still love you, still appreciate you joining us. And on behalf of Rob, Gene, and Loop TV, bye for now.